Welcome to Security Heroes, a podcast by Athena Security. We share real-life stories to help connect you to real heroes in the security world. I am your host, Lisa Falzone. Warning, the following recording contains potentially disturbing content. Listener discretion advised. All right, so we're here with security expert Michael Gips to discuss the recent tragedy at Riverside Regional Medical Center in Newport News, Virginia. To briefly summarize the incident, officers got a call at 8:20 a.m. on Sunday that there had been a shooting inside Riverside Regional Hospital. They arrived to find a man and a woman in their 70s suffering from gunshot wounds in a fourth-floor hospital room. The couple were pronounced dead at the scene. The man was a patient at the hospital, and it appears his wife shot him before turning the gun on herself. So, Michael, you're a former chief knowledge officer at ASIS International and currently an independent security consultant. So you've been studying this kind of thing for years. How can we help prevent tragic incidences like this from happening?
Well, first, Lisa, thank you for having me on the program. And yes, it is a tragic incident, and it is very difficult to prevent this sort of thing from happening in a hospital, because you have to remember, hospitals are welcoming people, bringing in people who are in the worst stages of their life. Nobody wants to go to a hospital. These are people who are ill physically or mentally impaired. They're scared. They may have financial issues, worrying about how to pay. They might be coming to the end of their life or doing something that's, that putting their basically their life is on the line, and they're putting themselves in the hands of people they don't know. So it's a very traumatic experience, and it's going to bring out the most raw emotions and often the worst in people. But there are things that we can do. Hospital security, but not just hospital security, staff and administrators in any healthcare institution. And you want to start by, like in any kind of security situation, doing a risk assessment, seeing what your risk profile is, and determining what kind of incidents have happened in the area and in the past in the facility, where there are vulnerabilities, how many doors are open, people can get in, where they can get into, et cetera, et cetera. And we can get into some of the other measures as well. But one of the key ones, of course, is weapons detection. People, there are many shootings at hospitals, a lot of people getting in with guns and other weapons, including knives. And, a good weapons detection system and program, and not just a typical magnetometer, but something that may have a visual camera as well. It could have AI, as well as a proper procedure and protocol for gathering people, for making sure secondary checks are made, making sure that the person is screened properly, and that there's a security force available for quick response in case a weapon is detected. And then, that goes with many other factors, dealing with access control, staff education, quick response teams, de-escalation teams, if anybody is starting to show signs of violence, and as well as tracking people who have been violent or expressed violence in the past. Someone comes through the access point or the weapons detection system, and a good system will be able to either trigger or be integrated with a system that can identify the person who has caused problems or posed a threat in the past.
So I don't know if you know this, but just 3 days earlier in the adjacent city of Hampton, a student at Phoebus High School had attempted to bring a gun into the school, but it was caught by a weapons detection unit during a routine safety check. And so authorities were alerted, and the firearm was confiscated before anything happened. How often do you think weapon detection systems are the difference between a quiet sort of tragedy averted and a tragic incident we all hear about?
Well, we'll never know exactly, but there are enough anecdotal cases and evidence that I would say it's a fair amount of cases averted. Now, if you have somebody who is dead set on getting into a hospital for a specific person to attack somebody, like a doctor, maybe who they thought messed up their surgery, or a gangbanger that shot their friend and they're in the emergency room, that's one sort of thing. But in a lot of other cases where you have people who might be carrying weapons, who don't have a specific target in mind, who might be looking for a generally to attack someone who holding a weapon, a weapons detection system would be a good deterrent. They'll look at that and say, I'm going to hit an easier target. Or in another case where they may not be looking for a target, but they carry a weapon. And once they're inside the hospital, if there's no weapons detection or it gets by the screening, they later get agitated. Something happens, there's a confrontation. Oh, they have a weapon on hand. You don't want them to have a weapon on hand in that sort of situation. So yes, weapons detection screenings would help in those cases. And you can see a lot of cases where people turn around before they get to weapons screening systems and they go back to their car, put the gun in the car, or they otherwise turn around. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence and documentation of really go to any hospital and they'll tell you about that happening quite often, and any other place with weapon screening systems.
So how should hospitals balance the needs for quick and easy entry and passage with the need for security? And how realistic is it for a hospital to have every door locked, controlled, and monitored with some sort of detection system?
Well, hospitals can be vast places with lots of corridors. We've all been there, medical centers that have units for every kind of sort of medical treatment or medical ailment. But have you walked around a hospital? Most doors are locked. To get into any kind of, if you want to get into the pharmacy, if you want to get into any room with equipment, those doors are locked. And it is a burden. It is costly. Whether you want to have access control and everything, you have to really do the risk assessment and see whether there's value. There are an awful lot of doors, but it could just be a matter of closing off a corridor, only staff. You don't necessarily have to have access control or monitored access control. You can have just a regular key and lock, and just make sure the corridor is off limits to non-staff or even staff who don't have credentials. So there are different ways of doing this without necessarily breaking the bank or putting electronic locks on every door and having it monitored.
Yeah. I suspect a lot of people wouldn't necessarily think a 70-year-old woman would be a threat. Do you think that bias might prevent people from recognizing a potential threat?
Absolutely. That's a great point. It happens all the time. You see someone in a wheelchair, you don't consider them a threat. You see an old person, you don't consider them a threat. So someone who looks meek. But all the time, there are people who defy the stereotypes or even use their seemingly innocuous behavior look to take advantage of the lack of awareness and to be the culprit. There are so many cases where people have come into all sorts of facilities hiding weapons in their wheelchair, because when the wheelchair is going to attack anybody, well, they may need the wheelchair, or they may not. They may just be posing, or someone else may use their wheelchair, either known to them or unbeknownst to them, to carry a weapon in. So yes, we can't just look at, there's an old person or 70-year-old woman. They look docile. Human nature is to do that, right? We all do that to a certain extent, but we cannot overlook that there are always people that defy the profile,
right?
And so that requires us to be, more alert and more vigilant.
Right. And I think hospitals in particular, it's important just to screen everybody, because you just never know who's going to have a weapon and who's going to be in a situation and in distress. So the hospital quickly went on lockdown while the officers checked other rooms, but they determined no one else was injured and the incident appeared to be a murder-suicide. How important are lockdowns during a potentially active incident? And what are the key elements of an effective lockdown?
Yeah, lockdown, you have to make sure that, you're locking people in and not locking people in where they're safe, not locking people out of exiting. And in a huge medical institution, having a lockdown is, it's a pretty big decision. You have to figure out where the assailant is, what parts of the building to lock down. Are you locking by floors? What are you disabling? Are you disabling the elevators? People are always able to escape through the emergency stairwells and exits. What are you going to do about that? Are you allowing movement on some floors? Are you allowing movement by key personnel? So there's a lot of factors that go into a lockdown. And, I've done lockdowns with a lot of institutions, and the smaller the institution or the facility, the easier it is. I think that the biggest variable in an effective lockdown is communication. Go to a facility and say, okay, we're going to do a lockdown. And then people, the security people and administrative staff might say, okay, great. What does that mean? Even a lot of the security people will not know what a lockdown means. There might be different types of lockdowns. As I said, partial lockdowns, locking of certain doors, keeping people out or keeping people in, whatever the case may be. How do you communicate to everyone else? There's someone coming into the building. Are you who's stopping people from coming to the building? Are you locking the front doors? Who among the security staff knows? Who among the professional staff knows? Are you going to have an alarm throughout the building? How do you get people to pay attention to the alarm in a hospital when there's a code blue or red or orange or whatever every 5 seconds in a hospital? It's really, and when people hear that, they won't know what it is. They won't know how to react. So you have potentially thousands of staff and thousands of patients and family and friends and visitors who won't be operating off the same sheet of music, don't understand the protocol. So you really have to have your key people trained, maybe have floor wardens, key security staff, and you can't just do this on the fly. You really have to prepare for it. You have to train for it. You have to test for it. But, in a hospital, you can't just run drills and say, okay, let's shut down everything and let's evacuate or whatever the case may be. People can't, people are impaired. People are in for surgery. People are disabled. Medical personnel are going from room to room, making critical, decisions, like having to see, in the middle of an operation or, some sort of treatment. So you've got to do this sort of these sorts of drills and this testing while the hospital is in its normal operations, because it's not practical to have, a lockdown, a test lockdown, maybe, perhaps in the middle of the night or sometimes when it's slow, but it's a chaotic environment and, training for it, testing, but without actually having to necessarily go through a full lockdown is probably the most likely and, and the most realistic kind of preparation you can make.
Yeah, this has been really helpful. And thank you so much for your advice. I mean, the purpose of this is, hopefully we can learn from the incident and help prevent it in the future. And so is there any final advice that you would give any hospital administrators?
Yeah, I would try to avert any issues. I mean, you know what you're dealing with. You have people who are sick, upset, maybe financially strained, and even the staff, are often overworked, stressed, working late hours. I would, this sounds kind of fanciful, but think of what you're doing when with your staff. Really work with your nurses, your doctors, your technicians, anyone else in people skills, in sort of humane treatment. That's probably the number one most important factor in patients being satisfied and patients not getting upset or violent. They have kind of humane interactions, positive interactions with the care staff. I think that would be number one. After that, I would, as I mentioned before, document anybody who is potentially threatening, has said something menacing to any of the staff or done something. To staff. Anytime they come in the building, you can flag them and have teams that can be deployed, not just in a security situation, but if someone's upset, you might have someone who wakes up from surgery and says, I don't belong here. Why did I get surgery? Blah, blah, blah. Very upset. You have a team of staff, maybe mental health experts, safety people, medical staff, maybe security personnel as well, and these are teams that would be trained and have worked together to intervene and to bring down the heat, to de-escalate the situation. So those are things that I would suggest. Well, awesome. Thank you so much, Mike, for your time. Really, really appreciate it. My pleasure. And thank you for having me. All right. Talk soon. All right. Bye-bye. All right. Security Heroes is brought to you by Athena Security. To find out more about Athena Security and how we help save lives through our weapon detection solution, visit www.athena-security.com. And then make sure to search for Security Heroes in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Athena, thanks for listening.